All right. Well, I am pleased to be joined here on the show by Dakota Randall, Patriots beat reporter for the Pro Football Network. You can read his work over at profootballnetwork.com. Dakota, thank you for joining me on such a busy time of year as camp is now about a week underway. But yeah, thank you for being here and welcome to the show. We're glad to have you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. It was great meeting you and some of your friends down in Greenville a couple months back when my wife and I went to visit some friends. That's where we ran into each other and talked about doing a podcast. So glad we could finally make it happen.
Absolutely. You run into people at random times throughout life, and this was obviously a really awesome chance occurrence here that we get to talk with you here on the show about the New England Patriots. Really excited about that, and if we have time at the end of the show, maybe we'll get your thoughts on some of the larger league as a whole. But really excited to talk New England since there's so much to talk about with the Patriots for it seems like the first time in quite a while. Obviously, they've always been relevant in the news cycle for winning championships and Tom Brady and Bill Belichick, but now they're a part of the news cycle for a lot of different reasons. Before we get into the whole zeroing in on training camp and everything, just give me a little bit of insight and for our viewers and everything like that into your background. I know you've covered the Patriots for several years. I know you covered the league for a little bit there at Pro Football Network too earlier this year. So yeah, just tell us a little bit about your career trajectory and a bit of your background.
Yeah. I grew up in Wolfboro, New Hampshire, kind of in the middle of nowhere up in the woods. Went to school up in that area. And then around the mid 2000s, I went to grad school in Boston University. And it was there that I latched on as a high school sports reporter for the Boston Globe and eventually got hired by New England Sports Network, or NESN, which for people in this area is a pretty big news outlet. It's the station that broadcasts the Red Sox and the Bruins. So I wrote for that website from 2016 through 2020, just covering all sports, everything. Especially, I was kind of the Red Sox guy. I've always been a bit of a seam head, but I actually joined that website because they were starting an automotive brand. And so I didn't know anything about cars or NASCAR, but I was like covering NASCAR and IndyCar and car stuff. It was weird, but eventually just started doing all sports. And then it was in 2021, Mac Jones' first season, when I got hired as their Patriots beat reporter. Did that for a few years. And then this past offseason, I switched jobs over to Pro Football Network, which is strictly football. Started there as a league-wide NFL analyst. Did that for a few months, and then recently they shifted gears, and now I'm back on the Patriots beat, basically what I was doing before. So I'm excited. I love being around the team a lot, and as you mentioned, there's a lot to talk about. So even if they're not supposed to be good, they're interesting in their own way, and especially in this region, they're always relevant.
Absolutely, they're always being talked about one way or another. So a lot to get to. I guess we can start with recent news. I mean, of course, we're going to talk about Drake Maye. We're going to talk about Jerod Mayo here. I'd be remiss, and we probably wouldn't have a show if we didn't talk about that. But they have had a lot of new, or I should say, recent re-signings on the team throughout the offseason. Really, they've done a lot of housekeeping in that regard. Just re-signed defensive tackle Devon Gottschall. Latest string of re-signings this offseason. And then meanwhile, I know just before we got on the show here, Diana Rossini dropped that report about Matthew Judon, who's been holding out for an extension. The report that the Patriots were working on a deal with him. He is rebutting that. What do we make of all of this? You can kind of give me your thoughts on the team's re-signings as a whole, and also this Matthew Judon saga that continues to roll along.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Clearly, with Elliot Wolf, doesn't have the official title. They gave him some creative title that I still can't remember, vice president of something. But he's basically the GM. And it's clear that, one of their priority this offseason was, re-signing their top in-house players, rewarding the players that have both performed on the field and sort of done the Patriot way, as much as we all hate that phrase. And obviously that was, it's a departure from the way it was under Bill Belichick. But Belichick absolutely did reward some players, but he played hardball with a lot and squeezed a lot of guys out of town. But this year was significantly different. I mean, in the offseason alone, they either re-signed or extended Jabril Peppers, Christian Barmore, Ramondre Stevenson, Kyle Duggar, Mike Nwenu, Hunter Henry, Kendrick Bourne, Jelani Tavai, and Anthony Jennings, Josh Uche, David Andrews. and then most recently today, Devon Godchow. So, on the one hand, that's good. You want to establish a culture where players feel like if they play well, they can get paid. On the other side, the byproduct of that is, guys start looking around the locker room and saying, well, if he's getting paid, why aren't I getting paid? And I think that's most certainly what's going on with Matthew Judon right now. I don't even have to think it. He said it. I think on the first day of training camp, he held court in the probably most wildly honest press conference I've ever seen covering the Patriots. Certainly something you wouldn't have seen under Belichick, where he admitted he was envious and jealous seeing all of his teammates getting paid, that he's not paid what he's worth, all this kind of stuff. And so, it's something Jerod Mayo's going to have to deal with. He's established sort of a new precedent, but now he's got to establish a different kind of precedent, and that is if you have a star player who's out openly complaining and lobbying for a new contract, refusing to practice, do you reward that player and pay him so other players think if they do the same thing, they'll get paid? Do you trade him and lose one of your best defensive players, especially with Barmore potentially looking at a lost season with blood clots? Or do you say, what maybe Belichick would do, which is, deal with it, tough, you sign the contract and you're going to stay here and play for me. You don't control the roster. I control the roster and you're here. You could do that, but then you open yourself up to a distraction for a rebuilding team that doesn't need any more of those. So it's a tricky situation. It's the first bit of adversity that Mayo's going through. And, I think it will be interesting to see how he handles that going forward.
Yeah, probably good early on to get a little bit of a test there for the head coach and see how he handles that process. I guess the good thing with Jerod, right, and we'll talk more about his acclimation, whatever period that takes for him having been there. I think his experience in New England in that locker room probably does kind of speed up that transition process and dealing with situations like this. He already kind of knows how the game is played and how this goes along. So as it relates to Matthew Judon, he's an interesting player in the league as a whole, I think, because he's one of those guys that's probably been underrated his whole career in terms of like the value he provides. He's a very solid player, but he's not a superstar. Now, granted, with New England, he's really come into his own, especially the last few years. What do you make of him in terms of his value to the team, his importance to the team? I mean, is he a guy that this defense really needs this season in order to be, considered one of the better units to be able to keep this team that's in an offensive transition phase in games? Or is he a guy that, maybe could be expendable despite his talents?
So first of all, I mean, if this were 9 years ago when the Patriots were just running over the league, Matthew Judon is absolutely the kind of player where Belichick would have traded him, rather early than late. Think Logan Mankins, think all the myriad examples of guys that he did that with, because you don't want to reward past performance. He is a very good player. So in 2021, he had 12.5 sacks. He faded down the stretch. That was the big story that year. In 2022, he finished with 15.5 sacks. He statistically faded down the stretch, but if you watch the games, he was absolutely still generating pressures and more involved. So it was a really good season for him. Almost beat the Patriots single season sack record. And last year he was on a sack per game pace before tearing his biceps in October. And so that's, part of the problem here, right? Like you're talking about a guy who's going to be 32 in, August 15th. He's coming off a torn biceps. So that's, one reason why you would potentially look to move him or not guarantee a lot of money to him. But also on the defensive side of the ball, I think the Patriots are deep there. Maybe not with, proven track record, but I think in potential, youth. You look at guys like Josh Uche, who had, I think 12 or something sacks a couple years ago, down year last year. Anthony Jennings, who's not a big sack guy, but he's really good off the edge as a run defender. Sets probably the best edge on the team. And then I think the other player, second round pick last year, Keon White, who I think has probably been their best player in camp. He looked excellent down the stretch last year. I mean, I think if you're looking for a breakout star candidate on the Patriots, that's the one to look at. He's just been dominant in camp. And so I think they could look at him and say, well, in Keon White and in some of the guys we have, we could absorb the loss of Matthew Judon because, we can find pass rush elsewhere. The problem is now Christian Barmore might be gone for the season, right? Maybe he comes back, but David Andrews missed the entire season in 2019 with blood clots. Antonio Garcia, he's since come back and played well, obviously, but Antonio Garcia, a guy who dealt with blood clots previously, never really came back. So you don't really know with Christian Barmore, right? It could be probably going to have to go on blood thinners. That could at least be a couple months because you can't really practice on those. So I think, you kind of have to expect that he might be gone for the season. And then if you're the Patriots and you might be rebuilding, but you're still trying to compete, and I am someone who believes they do have a chance to be slightly better this year than many believe, your best chance to do that is by winning on defense. And maybe you could have accomplished that without Matthew Judon when you had a healthy Christian Barmore. But without a healthy Christian Barmore, I don't think Keon White and Anthony Jennings and Josh Uche are enough. I think you kind of need Matthew Judon, and I think he knows that too, which I'm sure is something he's bringing up in these contract negotiations that continue to escalate publicly.
It's very interesting. There's going to be a spotlight on a lot of these narratives throughout the offseason or training camp, I should say, into the preseason and, of course, the regular season. As we transition here into some of the newer faces, or at least newer faces in newer roles, Jerod Mayo gets the head coaching job after obviously decades of success under Bill Belichick. And, the Tom Brady era is long gone, that they've even transitioned from the Mac Jones phase. You've obviously covered the team under a Bill Belichick regime. Now you've gotten, a week or so into training camp and, of course, the offseason with Jerod Mayo. What are some of the differences you've seen, if any? And what are kind of the expectations, the ancillary type of vibes going on in New England around this Jerod Mayo tenure?
Yeah, there's definitely a different vibe at practice. I mean, I asked Juju Smith-Schuster yesterday, I asked him that exact question. What are some of the differences between a Belichick practice and a Jerod Mayo practice? And he did one of those things where he kept pausing and trying to find his words. And if you looked at him, you could clearly tell he would have liked to have said something sort of anti-Belichick. He didn't quite pull the trigger, but he said the energy is better. He just likes being out there more. I think there's a lot of that going on. Jerod Mayo certainly definitely looser. I mean, and Jerod Mayo has done these little player-friendly touches sort of on the margins, right? So for the offseason award winners or Patriots, the Patriots honor players who, kind of led by example during the offseason. I'm not quite sure what the reward was, if any, in the past, but now it's things like music plays throughout the entire practice now. That never used to be the case. It was just in team drills. Now plays the whole practice, and the offseason award winners pick the daily playlist. So, there's like 13 of the guys who won, and one day this player will be able to pick all the music, right? Or now those players have a personal golf cart transport from the locker room, which is pretty far from the practice field, all the way to the field instead of having to walk that whole way. So there's all this kind of stuff going on. The practices start at 11 rather than like 9:30 a.m. And Mayo explained that is because whereas in the past, the Patriots used to do them very early, that meant that they had to really the players had to process the stuff that they went over at nighttime. And sometimes players, you kind of lose that overnight and you need a bit of a refresh in the morning, but they weren't getting it. Now they come in for meetings in the morning, really sort of cross the T's, dot the I's, and get out there. I think that actually is a really good move. But there's other stuff like a player's lounge with billiards and ping pong in there that wasn't in there before. So there's all that stuff going on, plus the fact that you have guys openly talking about contracts, which never would have happened. So definitely a different vibe. But as we've seen, the other side of that is, I think there's a little bit of a, the new teacher is in, and the students are kind of seeing what they can get away with in some respects, and with Matthew Judon and Devon Godchaux before the extension, at the front of that line.
Substitute teacher Jerod Mayo, I like it. Yeah. With the Bill Belichick thing, kind of sticking on that, I'm curious your thoughts, because obviously Bill Belichick is going to go down as one of the greatest, if not the greatest, head coach in NFL history. It's also very clear that over the last several years, really since you got there covering Mac Jones and that draft and where they've gone since then, it's been a precipitous fall from where they were. Obviously, Tom Brady is connected to a lot of that, but Bill Belichick was still around years after, and we've seen coaches like Pete Carroll, lose their all-pro or future Hall of Fame quarterbacks and still, keep the ship somewhat afloat, right? They've had success, and part of that's due to, Geno Smith having a resurgence and, different things like that. We don't have too many examples of a Bill Belichick type of coaching situation. But that being said, did it just kind of feel like over the years that type of coaching, that very stern approach that won them all those games, that won them the championships? Clearly it worked. Was there a sense that that was just kind of the times were passing him by in that regard? And this is a new crop of players, a new generation of NFL players that maybe just are much more amenable to a Jerod Mayo style, or even just, a little bit looser than someone like Bill Belichick, who is so far on the extreme on the other side.
Yeah, I think there is something to that. I do think it's a little overblown. I think when it comes to that, I think it's not even a specific to Bill Belichick. You saw this happen with Josh McDaniels, and I think you've seen it happen with a lot of Belichick's disciples where, that thing works, but you have to win. And Belichick obviously, had a lot of clout and, the benefit of the doubt with, even younger players coming in. Like, no, they hadn't played for him and they hadn't won with the Patriots, but, the track record was there and they could buy in. But when you have 3, 4, 5 seasons in a row where you're not very good, you start to wonder, why am I practicing harder and putting in all this work and, all this other stuff with how tough they are with the media and everything. Why am I doing all this and I'm not seeing the results? I do think that starts to erode a little bit, not in one season, not in 2 seasons, but by the end, it was like 4 consecutive seasons of that. And you started to have multiple draft classes and multiple free agent additions coming in, and not seeing the benefits of the Patriot way, so to speak, as in years prior. But so I think that was certainly part of it. But I think really the failures of Belichick, because I think he was still absolutely spot on as a coach. I think, he hadn't lost his fastball at all. I think you talk to the guys in the locker room, they were all still blown away by the game planning, his ability to find the details, win on the margins, all that kind of stuff. I don't think any of that dipped at all. I think it was the general manager failings. I think it was Belichick, the GM, that sent the thing off the rails. It was, it was twofold. It was, the irresponsible handling of Mac Jones with installing Matt Patricia and Joe Judge, and not a real offensive line coach, and not giving him receivers or a good, tackle duo, that kind of stuff. But also just, things that he did when the Patriots were really successful, developing succession plans. I mean, we talked about trading guys before it was too late, getting out ahead of it, and always having a pipeline of talent coming in ready to go. Just kind of stopped doing that. He didn't have a succession plan for Rob Gronkowski. He started to fade, then he retired, and it was just a black hole at that position for a few years until they had to overpay for Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith. They didn't have a succession plan for Devin McCourty, and they still really haven't found a replacement free safety. They've had to put strong safeties into that spot, and they don't look that great in them. Same thing with the receivers. And obviously he didn't really have a succession plan for Tom Brady ready. He went to Cam Newton, thought he could just figure it out. Same thing, in the heyday with players like Dante Hightower, just kept having to overpay him because they didn't develop a succession plan. So I think it was really around 2013-14 where the draft classes started to dip and the succession plans weren't there. And it created a snowball where they had to keep overpaying an aging roster. And it just turned into a house of cards that all sort of fell apart.
It's an interesting juxtaposition there. The man who always has a plan ready for the games didn't have a plan for some of the bigger transition periods in New England football. Talking here with Dakota Randall of the Pro Football Network. Let's get to Drake Maye, the number 3 overall pick, one of the highest Patriots draft picks in history, let alone at the quarterback position. And he's coming in with a lot of hype, of course, just a few years after Mac Jones was taken fairly high himself. I know that there's been a lot of reports about Drake Maye's struggles in practice. Obviously, with any rookie, there's going to be struggles, and it's hard to make a total evaluation. But from what you've seen since the draft and of course here in camp, what are you making of Drake Maye so far, and how is that looking, especially with Jacoby Brissett there and that kind of mentorship, and how they're divvying up the reps and that entire situation so far?
So I think 2 things can be true. Number one, is it a little worse than I was expecting at this point? Yes. And I think if you were to, give truth serum to Patriots front office guys and Mayo, they probably would admit that they thought it would be a little closer between Maye and Brissett at this point. It's not close at all. But at the same time, I'm not really surprised. I mean, I think, people have short-term memory loss, right? We at the draft, everybody said Drake Maye, franchise quarterback talent, but probably a guy that is going to have to sit for a little bit, if not redshirt his entire first season. Maybe is even a guy like Jordan Love who's going to have to sit for multiple seasons. He might be that kind of guy. And then all of a sudden we get to training camp. He looks like that kind of guy. He looks like a guy that didn't come from a pro-style offense, hasn't had to call plays from the huddle, all that kind of stuff. He's struggling with it. And all of a sudden the hot takes come out, right? And where you're hearing people comparing him to Mac Jones or saying that Joe Milton's been better and all this kind of stuff, where none of this really should be surprising. He's going through rookie struggles. There's been a learning curve. I think the last 3 practices were especially underwhelming. He's, on a bit of a losing streak right now. And so it kind of looks like he has like rookie brain overload, where the Patriots have an off day today. I think he clearly needed to reset a little bit. Because it's kind of all of it. He's not I think diagnosing the plays very well. Like there was a play the other day where the Patriots were showing an all-out blitz that you could have seen from Canada. Like it was blatantly obvious, and it looked like Drake Maye didn't recognize it. He snapped the ball, saw the blitz come, and immediately just sprinted to the sideline and threw the ball out of bounds. There's just a lot of that where I think he's not seeing it right. The game's speeding up a little bit. So he's just got to work through it. There absolutely have been flashes where you see the potential. But the Patriots also aren't really asking him to do a lot of the things where you would see, the Josh Allen-esque or Justin Herbert-esque talent that everybody buzzed about. Like they're not having him push the ball downfield. They're not having him run around and do these off-script plays. They're trying to teach him to run a West Coast style offense that's led by the running game. And trying to teach him to crawl before he can walk, let alone run. So, a lot of people are saying, we have a lot of these people who come to these Patriots practices for just one day, and they look at it and they're like, I'm not seeing it. And it's like, well, you wouldn't see it because they're not even putting him in a position to do it. They're just doing basics with him at this point and trying to build him up from the foundation. So it just hasn't. It's neither looked good, nor has the execution been good on his part. So he's going through it right now. It's been a struggle. And I would just say, as far as a quarterback competition, there's not one going on right now. And at this point, it would be a major upset, I think, if Drake Maye somehow passes Jacoby Brissett this summer, because he just has that far to go.
Yeah. And like you said, that's probably the best case scenario for Drake Maye as well, to kind of have things slowed down a little bit and not have that pressure to immediately step into a situation that also might not be a perfect situation for a young rookie quarterback, which is kind of what brings me to this next question, because, Mark and I on the show here are both from the Chicagoland area. Mark is the, diehard Bears fan on the show. I'm a Steelers fan myself, but there are a lot of parallels to how the Bears have, brought along their quarterback situation over the last several years to how the Patriots have been encountering that as well. They both had very heavily defensive-minded head coaches for both young rookie quarterbacks in the 2021 draft. Both came into situations with, less than ideal O-line play, not really anyone to speak of at the skill positions, and a defense that was in a transitional phase as well, not to mention a growing difficulty within the division as well. So both of them have had those parallels. Obviously, the big difference this year is that the Bears get to bring in a, seemingly pro-ready quarterback in Caleb Williams, also having the infrastructure in place with the DJ Moores of the world, with, an offensive line that has been rebuilt over the last couple of years, and a lot more stability surrounding him. So with all of that being said, how do you feel about how the Patriots are handling a number 3 overall pick at quarterback? And are they, putting the right things in place to make sure that he's not put in a situation that Mac Jones was in early in his career, where it was almost doomed to fail from the start?
Yeah, I mean, the Bears comparison is interesting too, because, I don't want to say the Bears got lucky, but, they kind of had that 1 in a million, home run they hit with that trade, where they were able to kill a ton of birds with one stone and in the same breath eventually land a true pro-ready quarterback in Caleb Williams, where, I mean, I think the Bears, they were aggressive this offseason, and I think part of that is they look at it and said, why can't we be the Houston Texans of last year, if not better? Sure. If you're a Chicago Bears fan, like, I don't think the Bears are going to win the Super Bowl, but if the Bears, the roster is good, and if everything goes right, who knows, right? And they have that kind of shot where, I don't think the Patriots realistically would believe that Drake Maye would be that effective as a rookie. So I always was hesitant to believe that they would have gone out and made some big move for a star receiver this offseason. I thought there was a chance, just because at the end of the day, you want to get that kind of guy to help develop your young quarterback. But it just wasn't in the cards. And so for the Patriots, I think they're doing it right where, they're not rushing him. I think at the end of the day, they're not gonna. I'd be stunned if they start him in week 1. I think there are a lot of people that want them to just do that and say sink or swim, trial by fire. But they're going to play the long game with this. They're trying to build this thing from the ground up, establish new culture. They're trying to address the offensive line as well as they can. They're paying their in-house players, as I mentioned, to keep the core on defense, establish an identity on defense. They locked up their running back. They did draft 2 young receivers. One of them, Jalen Polk, looks really good. I think that looks like a hit for them, at least to this point. So I think, I on the one hand, if you're the Patriots, maybe you could have gone the Tennessee Titans approach, where they're like, let's just put all the chips in now and see what we have in Will Levis. I think the Patriots are, going out of their way to play the long game, which isn't a surprise to me because it's kind of the Packer way of doing things. And that's where a lot of these top decision makers now come from, is they all have Packer backgrounds. So they're not going to rush this thing. And so that might be frustrating for the fans, but I think ultimately it's the right thing to do, especially, again, when we look at someone like Drake Maye, who, I don't think he's ready to be a Caleb Williams at this point by any means.
Yeah, definitely some disparity there between those two quarterbacks, and definitely in different unique situations. But I think, personally speaking, that's probably the best way to go about it for New England. I know maybe some are itching to see Drake Maye get out there right away and play football and get through those growing pains, because that seems to be the way that a lot of NFL teams are working with their quarterbacks lately. But as you mentioned, we've seen examples like Jordan Love, where it pays to sit and wait a little bit and develop those skill sets a little bit more.
And I mean, and I was just gonna add, I think, and this is a take some people give me hell for, but I do think, and the math has changed a little bit with Christian Barmore maybe being out, and who knows with Matthew Judon, but I do believe there's a path for the Patriots to be better this season than some people realize. My rationale for that is they brought everybody on defense back, and a defense that was very good last season without Judon and without Christian Gonzalez. So they didn't even have their number 1 cornerback. And I think
that's a great point. Yeah,
so I think, and that's a team that lasts. So I think the defense gives them the floor of last year's team, in my opinion. And this is, again, I'm taking the coaching out of it. I know people will say, well, you don't have Belichick, you have Mayo. My counter to that would be, I don't know how much difference Belichick made the last 4 years. I think the thing went off the rails. The positional coaching was awful as far as receivers and individual players on offense. I don't think the Belichick difference was being made the last 4 years. So I'm just going to kind of give them that one and say that the coaching won't be a disaster. And so I think the defense gives them the floor of last year's team, which won 4 games and was in almost every game, despite receiving, just about as bad a quarterback play as you could imagine. If the Patriots received just bad quarterback play last year, let alone average, they might have won 7 or so games. They lost 3 games right at the buzzer last year on like missed field goals or last second interceptions in the end zone, that kind of stuff. And so you now have a quarterback in Jacoby Brissett who's, he's not great or anything, but he's a veteran who knows how to protect the ball and at least not have these complete brain lapses where he ruins the game. And so if they can keep the score low, run the ball, and have a quarterback who doesn't turn it over, I don't think it's unreasonable to say they can jump from 4 wins to 6, 7, right? And then if you're really getting bold and saying, well, stuff happens in the NFL every year that you don't predict. A few years ago, we thought the Raiders, the Broncos with Russell Wilson, even the Colts when they got Matt Ryan, the Browns when they made their trades, like all these teams are going to be awesome. And I think the Patriots, even as bad as they were in 2022, finished ahead of all of them because you just don't know what's going to happen in the NFL. We don't know what Aaron Rodgers is going to look like at age 40 with his situation. Which teams are going to regress? Maybe the Bills regress. You just never know. And so maybe they get lucky along the way and pick up another win that way. And so I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that at the end of the year, you look at it and say, they're a lot further along than I thought. Now let's see if Maye is ready. And then all of a sudden in 2025, if you go out and get that receiver one way or the other and figure out left tackle, you're kind of cooking with gas. So, and I know Patriots fans, they don't want to be patient. They want it all right now. But I would say at the same time, I don't think this is going to be a 2 or 3 year rebuild. I think it could just be maybe another year or so, and then we'll see.
Yeah, the rest of the NFL nation is saying the Patriots fans, you can be a little bit patient here at the 6 championships in 20 years. Yeah, it might take a little bit to get back to that form, but sounds like they have a lot of the things in place, and it's things are looking up at least for the New England Patriots.
Sort of. They could be terrible. They could be. Don't get me wrong. I mean, if Mayo can't coach and they don't have a left tackle, and they're putting a lot of pressure, a lot of weight on some young receivers' shoulders. I mean, they're relying heavily on 2 rookies and Polk and Baker, a 5'8" gadget slot guy into Mario Douglas, KJ Osborne, Kendrick Bourne is coming off a torn ACL, and then the rest of the guys are Juju Smith-Schuster, Kayshon Boutte. I think the receiver group,
I think Ramondre Stevenson is poised maybe for several touches this year.
And a huge workload, right?
Yeah.
So again, they are, as I said, I think the ceiling is a little higher than people think, but I do think they're a house of cards, and you pull a couple of them out, Barmore maybe already being the first one, and it could collapse. So by no means am I bullish, or have a high on the Patriots, but I'm cautiously optimistic that it won't be that bad.
Yeah, and that's fair because a lot of the narratives right now are, that the house is on fire type of deal because Drake Maye is not performing up to snuff and all of this stuff. But Jacoby Brissett is a very adult quarterback. He's the guy that's not going to kill. He's not going to lose you 5 games single-handedly with dumb play. But he might not win you games outright either. But he's a steadying force there, at least among NFL quarterbacks. You could do a lot worse. So
yeah, he is like the bridge quarterback. Like,
yes,
in the dictionary, bridge quarterback, Jacoby Brissett is that. I mean, like,
he's the guy, and he's familiar with New England, so that I'm sure that helps a lot. He's not having to learn. You got a new system in place and things like that, but
but he knows the system.
Having to learn.
He played in this Alex Van Pelt system in Cleveland, which I think is the main reason why he's here.
You go.
And you can tell on the field. That's the other reason why he looks so ahead of Drake Maye, because he should. He's a veteran. He's played a lot of football, and he knows this system. Drake Maye did not run this system in college, not even close. So that's why I get back to yes, Drake Maye, I'm a little disappointed that it's not popping earlier, but I'm also not remotely surprised that he's taken a while and that Jacoby Brissett as far ahead as he is, because he should be.
One final question here for you, Dakota, and then we'll let you go. I know you're a busy man. We're in the midst of training camp, and we've got the preseason right around the corner. Tomorrow, the Hall of Fame game kicks things off, and then next week we'll be having our first round of preseason games, and then it's football until February. What is one or maybe 2 even things that you're most looking for out of the Patriots? What do you think the Patriots need to get out of this training camp and out of these preseason games as they go into the season that maybe will illuminate some things about this team, or just show any sign of progress? Are there a couple? Obviously the quarterback position is a big one, but anything really that's sticking out to you that you're watching for?
Well, and I'll remove the quarterback thing from that because that is what it is, right? I think number one, by a substantial margin, is the offensive line. And that's really, this is for a whole nother podcast, but I think the failures of Mac Jones and the real cratering of the Patriots last couple of years, I think it all started on the offensive line. They just never addressed the tackle spots. It was a rotating door at both guard spots for the most part. It was bad. And so they need to find stability. I think they have a coach in Scott Peters who he knows what he's doing, which I couldn't say about Matt Patricia. But, the thing was early in camp and in the spring, they would throw these line combinations in a blender every day. Like it was just, other than the 3 interior spots with David Andrews at center, Sidy Sow at left, Mike Onwenu at right guard, the tackles were rotated. But even, during minicamp, they had Mike Onwenu going back and forth from guard to tackle. And we're just looking at it like, what is this combination going to be? But the last 4 practices have been the same combination, except David Andrews looks like he's dealing with a minor injury, so he hasn't been in there. But it's been Caden Wallace, the rookie, at left tackle, which I think is a surprise because he was at right in the spring, and Chukwuemeka at right tackle, the former Pittsburgh Steeler. And then in the interior, Sidy Sow at left guard, who's played really well. Mike Onwenu at right guard, who's been unbelievably dominant in training camp so far. And then when David Andrews is healthy, I think he's still one of the better centers in football. They need to test that combination in a game setting, especially the tackle spots, because it's one thing for Caden Wallace to look good in one-on-ones in training camp or in these padded practices against his teammates. And I want to see what he looks like in some of these preseason games. If at the end of the preseason you look at it and you think you actually have your left tackle in Caden Wallace, even if he'll go through some growing pains, but you look at it and say, that's the left tackle, I think that's a huge development and solves, one of the 3 or 4 glaring variables on this team, which is the head coach. Can he coach? Can the young quarterback play? Are you going to find a top receiver? And do you have a left tackle? If you can just solve that one left tackle one, I think that's a huge one that you can just knock off the board. And that gets them close to where they need to be. And the other one I would say is cornerback. Is Christian Gonzalez the player we saw in the first 4 games last year, or is he going to take a while to kind of get back into form? But beyond that, who's starting opposite him? Is it 31-year-old Jonathan Jones coming off a knee scope, or is it these not journeymen, but unproven young players like Marco Wilson, Alex Austin? I feel good about them at one corner spot, but I'm not sure about the other side. And again, if they're going to do anything this season, the defense needs to be excellent. And if you have a big hole at cornerback, it's tough to do that. So those are the 2 for me.
Perfect. Well, I'm really looking forward to seeing how the Patriots look this offseason. It's not one that one team that I've been, dialed in to watch during the preseason, but I think this year I'm going to be much more intrigued to see what this team looks like and who they roll out there and how this team is shaping up ahead of the regular season with such a competitive AFC East to compete in. So Dakota Randall, thank you so much for your time. You can catch his work at profootballnetwork.com. Hope to have you on the show again sometime. This was great.
Absolutely. I'd love to do it again. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it.